early show last Saturday night. Played at a place I hadn't played for a while. Old friends came out to listen, and the world somehow seemed right as we shared our favorite memories and our smiles. And when my work was over and we thought we'd hit the town, maybe keep the night from ending all too soon. We'd dance and laugh together, and we'd buy the bar around, sing along to an old familiar tune. But it could have been me, it could have been you, could have been someone that I loved, or someone we just knew. The simple act of living life and loving who we choose. It could have been me, it could have been you. When I first heard the news, I just sat there and stared as 10,000 hopes and dreams rushed through my mind. And I tried to capture all of them and handle them with care and hold them for the ones now left behind. But it could have been me, it could have been you, it could have been someone that I loved, or someone we just knew. The simple act of living life and loving who we choose. It could have been me, it could have been you. Now,
yes, good morning. Hello, I'm Jess Hayden, and on behalf of the Susquehanna Folk Music Society, I'd like to welcome you to today's Artist to Artist residency on women's music entitled Women's Music Saved My Life. This event is funded through a CARES Act grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. Additionally, we are thankful for funding from the Pennsylvania Council of the Arts and the Cultural Alliance of York County. Find out more about this and other Susquehanna Folk Music Society events at susquehannafolk.org. During today's residency, we ask that you keep your microphone on mute and put any questions that you might have in the chat. Now, on to folklorist Amy Skillman, who will introduce Session 1, Meet the Artists and the Moderators.
Thank you, Jess, and good morning, everybody.
good morning.
Hey, happy to be here. This is so exciting. So I'm happy to welcome you to the 4th Artist to Artist residency in our series sponsored by the NEA. Today we're exploring the question, what is women's music? And the subtitle of Women's Music Saved My Life. And that opening song that you heard by Bobbi Carmitchell embodies so many of the topics that we will be exploring today in our workshops and our storytelling sessions. So we've gathered together a fascinating group of women who represent some of the genre's early practitioners. And there are 5 sessions throughout the day today. And you can go to the, if you haven't already, let me hit the schedule and put it in the chat. Oops, did that go through? There we go. So you can go back to the website, the Susquehanna Folk Music website, to see the schedule, but I've also just put it in the chat so that you know what's coming up. But these are going to be exploring the roots of women's music, the practitioners, the culture, and the evolution of music that created community and belonging for women seeking to empower their lives. So as we have done with each of these residencies, we worked with a local artist to design a day that offers opportunities for collaboration and creativity. So of course, Any exploration of women's music must begin with our own Bobbi Carmitchell. So for this residency, she has called together some of her favorite musicians from around the country to tell stories, to play songs, and share their experiences as women musicians crafting a life for themselves. Now, you'll meet them in a moment, but I just want to give you a quick overview introduction. First, Bobbi. Bobbi is a much-loved singer and songwriter who's been writing songs and performing in the area and around the country for 40 years. She has several recordings to her name and often uses her music to shine a light on many causes that she believes in. Farmland preservation, breast cancer, and the like. She is an engaging performer who sings stories into song, but she's perhaps best known in the women's community for her efforts to foster a safe space for women to find their own creative spirits. Barb Barton may be a familiar name to some of you from central Pennsylvania. She lived here for a few years in the 90s when she worked as a biologist for the Nature Conservancy. She returned to her beloved Michigan, where she first learned to write songs, play guitar, and sing. She is especially skilled with open tunings and creating mood with her music, and you'll hear about that in one of the later sessions. As her bio says, her music was born and raised in the woods and waters of the great Midwest. And my favorite line from her bio, if trees sang backup, they'd be touring with Barb. I just love that. Now, Jamie Anderson is a multi-instrumentalist raised in Canada, but currently living in the Southwest. She has 12 albums to her name and has performed in venues around the world. She describes her music as folk without the Birkenstocks, country without the big hair, and jazz without the angst. Obviously, humor is an important part, an aspect of her being, which she will talk about. Her book, An Army of Lovers, explores the history and origins of the women's music movement. To explore this question of what is women's music, we also wanted to bring in some voices from the music industry, as well as a scholarly perspective. So our guest moderators, Deb D'alessandro and Kay Turner, will guide these thoughtful, playful, and informative sessions. Deb is the host and producer of WXPN's Amazon Country, the nation's longest running lesbian feminist radio program. She has been the host since, I think, 1996. Is that correct, Deb? Did I get that number right? All right. She's also an activist, an educator, and a singer in her own right. In fact, she sang for 17 years with She Who, a 7-voice women's a cappella ensemble. Kay Turner is a folklorist, a lesbian feminist queer activist, and a maven, I think, of the lesbian rock movement. In 2012, she created Otherwise, Queer Scholarship into Song, which is a musical cabaret of queer theory that has been staged in venues in New York City to Austin, Texas. She's the creator and host of Lesbopalooza, an epic lesbian music and performance variety show, and it just celebrated its 25th anniversary with a documentary. She's brilliant and she's hilarious. So I'm going to turn it over to Kay for all of your edification and entertainment, and Kay will moderate this session to meet everybody and begin our discussion about women's music. Okay.
Amy, great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who's here. It's great to see everyone.
What's up, Kay?
It's really, this is a great way to spend a Saturday morning in December. And I just wanted to begin, before I bring this into our group with the musicians and with Deb, just to start the ball rolling a little bit about this whole idea of women's music as a genre. Sort of where did that come from? What's that all about? I think Jamie has really treated that in her book. and she'll have some things to say about it for sure. But just to give a very brief overview, I mean, certainly women's music as a genre has been around for thousands of years. There have been specific ways in which women have made music both for each other and their communities in folk traditions, including things like lamentations and lullabies and things of that nature, for a long, long time. So the kind of thing that, of course, we're more interested in today, although we never want to lose sight of the way in which women have created music and created community with each other specifically, as part of human life for a long time. I think what we come to in terms of the group that is part of our great morning today is that in the 60s, the folk revival intersected with the women's liberation movement and the gay liberation movement. And there's much to say about that intersection, but certainly it produced a whole range of popular musics and an exploration of traditional folk musics that had not happened up until that time, except in more obscure scholarship or within specific communities. So, I mean, this is Joan Baez and Mimi Farina and Elizabeth Cotton and people like that who, became sort of forerunners of the popular folk music revival of the 60s. And then, we came into a period, where women's liberation, gay and lesbian liberation started to have a major effect and pull a whole other group of women into the picture. And, that would be Chris Williamson, Holly Near, various women from that era, and the beginnings of various women's music festivals in the 70s that a lot of us, I think, sitting here in the room have either attended or been part of at various points along the way. Deb is testimony to the fact that there were women's coffee houses, women's bookstores, women's radio stations that proliferated in this period and gave a voice and a place for women musicians to have their day. We are very lucky that we were part of this generation. And this is the generation that, most of I think all of the performers today certainly do represent. And, it's not over yet. So, it continued, it evolved into, I went for, sort of a punk rock and roll end of the spectrum. Then there was Riot Girl. Now there's a whole new crop of, incredible women. Folks, they identify kind of as folk singers in a way, singer-songwriters. But the thing that's interesting about, the Sophies and the, Billie Eilishes and all the people, out there making $1 million, are that they are, they are still struggling with this topic of what it means to be a woman and what it means to share the ways that women are still, abused and suffer under patriarchy, but also find community with other women. So, I mean, it's a long and storied history. It has lots of ins and outs, and I think all of our panelists and performers today will have much more to say about it in terms of their own life histories. So let's go there now. I'm gonna go to Bobbi Carmitchell because she is our local host, and we'd like to hear from her. And each of the musicians will tell you a little bit about how they got into women's music, what it means to them, and then also do a song that gives a sense of that. Okay, Bobbi.
Well, good morning, Kay. First of all, guys, so good to see you.
Great to see you. Yeah, this is like
and everybody
for some of us. Yeah.
Oh my God, it's great. I think the last time I saw you was at Pheasant Run at somebody's birthday party, Amy's birthday party, maybe.
And now
Maybe
she's
mine,
got
I
a
don't
decade. She's got another decade change ahead. Yeah.
I know, right? Here we go. You know, it's been so fun to be able to be to reconnect with everybody here on multiple levels, but especially Barb and Jamie, because we, like you said, Kay, we did kind of come through about the same. I think we're all 64, are we? Jamie, are you 64? Yeah, I think Barb is too. So, you know, we it's and when Amy and Jess had asked me to be a part of this, I'm like, wow, you know, who do we there's just multiple people to pick from. And the thing that was very clear to me at the beginning of this was that, you know, they're like, you know, can you pick people on a national for more on a national level who you'd want to be able to do this with? And you know, I thought of Barb and I thought of Jamie, and from you know, from Jess's standpoint, from the Susquehanna folk music standpoint, and that culture, which is a culture in of itself, folk music world, they were both they were unaware of Jamie and Barb because but for me they're nationally known because in my circle that I travel in the women's music circle and that culture, they're nationally known, but to other, you know, another folk music or a jazz circle or whatever circle, they weren't. So it was really interesting for us to be able to just say, hey, you know, these two women really have had, you know, and are still having an impact on a national level. And when I went back and started thinking about that, for me, like, where's the origin of all this? You know, I was raised in a very rural area of central Pennsylvania, which I live, you know, 45 minutes away from my birthplace. So I lived a pretty, in my estimation, a sheltered life as far as what's going on in the outside world. But even, oh, there's your shirt. I love that, Kay. There's girls in the nose shirt. But, you know, it's like we didn't know, you know, I see these generations that have come now. They know what it is they're kind of looking for to identify. But we, at least for me, as a young woman who was having crushes on her bus patrolman, you know, in fourth grade because her name was Penny Nisley. I acted out just so she could tell me to go sit in the back seat. You know, I was having all these undefinable experiences growing up that I didn't know how to even phrase the question, let alone who to ask the question to. So I'm growing up in this farm country with all of these great women around me, and I'm having these, you know, unexplainable crushes on them and experiences, and could talk to nobody. And I'm sure everybody on, you know, maybe Jamie and Barb will be able to relate as well. And then getting out my college equivalent years, when I moved to Shenandoah National Park and when I was 17, I got around people who were a little bit more out in the world, and they recognized for me where I was coming from, and they were able to identify me as a lesbian before I was able to identify myself. So as a result of that, they're like, "Hey, take a listen to this record," you know. And back then they were records. And I know, Kay, you had mentioned it but for all of the people who have no idea what some of these early women's music albums, first of all, here you go. Here's one of the quintessentials, if you can see it. This is Chris Williamson, right? For all of us, we're like, and it's called The Changer and the Changed. This was 1975 for a lot of you folks who are really here to find out what women's music was and how it got started. That's one of the big ones. And I know we all have, you know, whether we've, you know, I know Jamie's written a book on it, but all of our experiences are just tied into so many of these early recordings. And to be able to listen to that for the first time, first of all, to see that cover, that's a cover of a woman standing on a rock with a pair of great overalls on and looking totally in charge, and there are no men around her. She's not the girl singer in the front with the band behind. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but as a young woman trying to find my place, to see that photograph, because cover art, we can talk about that for hours, but the cover art of that that record, it was like, oh my God, this looks familiar to me. This is me standing out on the field, in Garber's Pond, when I'm a kid. So something about this really connects. And then to be able to listen to it, to listen to the music that was on there, it's like it became, it was a way for all of us to be able to just go, oh my God, that's where I fit in. That's where I fit in.
Right.
And then, so I moved back to Pennsylvania. It's 1980. I've kind of coming into my own. I'm in my early, like 2021, 22. And I meet up with two fabulous women musicians who are a duo. One is a lesbian and one is a straight woman. And this woman who is the lesbian, her name is Billmeyer. She was the first out lesbian in central Pennsylvania in 1980. The first out lesbian playing music in straight bars. So I walked into this perfect setting of understanding what of learning about women's music and the women's culture. And I was lucky. I was totally lucky. I got to just step right into it and meet all these great women. And that's kind of my story of how I got started with this.
Great background.
Yeah.
I mean, I think these individual stories are so important because we do, and they need to be, I'm glad we're recording this session because they need to be documented. The way into women's music is, through very crooked paths, it's not a straight line.
Sure.
And so that was great. Bobbi, can you give us a song? Let's hear it.
Sure. Yeah, sure, totally. I mean, I think, and I'm still playing this song, and we are all still playing it, and it is a song that it is a song called Song of the Soul. And, the thing about the sunlight is coming through and making me look like I'm wiped out, but hopefully, there you go. Let me scooch over this way. So this is a song that's based on a hymn, and it's kind of turned around a bit, and so when you are able to play it, that's what we'll get into later, is talking about how you choose your songs and what your audience is and how you get the message out. But this is sing along, you guys, if you all know it. Open mine eyes that I can see glimpses of truth thou hast for me. Open mine eyes, illumine me, Spirit divine. Love of my life, I am crying, I am not dying, I am dancing, dancing alone in the madness. There is no sadness, only a song of the soul, and we'll sing this song. Why don't you sing along? And we can sing for a long, long time. Why don't you sing this song? Why don't you sing along? And we can sing for a long, long time. There's a little snippet of it because I know we have more people to get into, but that is a fabulous song for all you people who have heard me play over the years. You're like, oh my God, I didn't know that was written by a lesbian.
That was great.
So,
Way to bring us this morning. Thank you so much, Bobbi.
bet.
Very excellent choice. Let's go on to Barb and see what she has to say about this thing called women's music.
Good morning, everybody. I grew up in pretty small town, junior high age and high school, little town in Cass County, Michigan called Edwardsburg, population 900 people. And for me, I knew I was lesbian always, and I didn't really put a label on it. It just was who I was. And I made the mistake in 7th grade of writing a love note to a girl in my school, which of course was passed around the entire school within 10 minutes. And from that point on, I had a lot of trouble, put it that way. That was in the 1970s, early 70s. And for me, music was a place that was safe, right? I could write and sing songs about my heart's passion, where I had no one else really to talk about these things with or share with that understood. And I went through high school and junior high, came from rock and roll. That's what my passion was at the time. And had lots of girlfriends in high school, very popular girls, and people would never have imagined what was going on.
Right.
Yeah. But when I went to college the first time, I started to meet other women who were like me. And then I learned about the Michigan Women's Music Festival, which we'll probably be talking about later. I didn't really know too much about it. So some friends of mine and I decided to go, and I regret this now, but we hid. I can't remember if we were in the trunk or in the back seat with blankets on top of us so we didn't have to pay for the extra admission. But I started hearing this incredible music, and then I got a copy of that album that Bobbi shared with us. And it was the strangest thing. My first reaction to that was one of, I don't want to say repulsion, but it was the first time that there was a reflection of who I was in a bigger world. I didn't realize, I still don't understand why I had that feeling, because I was very comfortable with who I was, but I think it was because it was so different. I had never heard women singing about women before. And I think it's the first time I saw a woman who didn't shave her legs. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you do that. But then it's like, well, why would, it's that whole thing of seeing something different, right? Even though I was a lesbian, it was still different to me. But after I listened to the album twice, then I fell in love with all of the songs, and it was just fantastic. I then eventually moved to Lansing, Michigan, went to Michigan State, and of course my world opened up from little town of 900 to the capital city, and got to meet lots more women and experience a lot more women-centered events. And I still was playing rock and roll and was transitioning into more of a contemporary folk style with rock influences. And my songwriting began to transform as I became older and more aware of the world around me into songs like Kay was saying about you, Bobbi, of finding something that's near and dear to your heart and then presenting it, sharing that story with people. And the first song, it was on my first album that I think was probably the most well-known at the time, was Song for Rebecca. And that was a song that I was really inspired to write. Probably the first one that I was really inspired to write about something I had heard. It was about two lesbian women who were shot on the Appalachian Trail. And I believe that happened in Pennsylvania.
It did happen, yeah, not far from Harrisburg, yeah, not far.
Yeah, and I'm also a backpacker, so that was like a double hit me really hard, that these two, because I had thought about that, being on the trail with former partners of mine, and you're always afraid, especially in that era. But I wrote that song, put it on my first album, and I started to get more into politics and dealing with women's issues. And I had to, since you're showing albums, I had to show this album, my album cover, the first one, because at the Women's Music Festival, clothes are optional, and the freedom to walk around without a shirt on when it's really hot out is just a wonderful feeling. And so I wanted to make a political statement. So let me see if you can see this. That's me tossing off my shirt. That's my first album cover.
One of my favorites. That's one of my favorite album covers.
Yeah, it was fun.
I have that album. It's wonderful.
Trying to, catch the picture that doesn't show, anyway.
Barb, can you give us a song? Yeah. Can you keep your shirt on, but play a song for us?
Yeah, I could do that. I was going to play that song for Rebecca, but, I thought it only happened to Barry Manilow and Joni Mitchell that your voice lowers as you get older.
Uh-oh.
But it does. And so I'm going to play a newer song for you. This is off my newest album, which is self-titled. I did it all backwards. But this is called Everything. Eyes open, hearts pounding, beat with the time that's changing, it's rearranging everything. Let go the hand that holds us down. Breathe in the love that's all around. House burns down, home rises up from the ground. Hearts reaching, love seeking, everything. Let go the hand that holds us down. Breathe in the love that's all around. Let's make a stand on solid ground and give a chance to what we found. So that's a part of that song, Everything. And it's one of my favorites
Thank
of
you,
mine.
Barb. That's
You're
great. And
welcome.
that's a new one.
Great
That's a new
tuning.
one.
Relatively,
Great
yeah. Thank you.
I think that we're really driving the message home here that women's music has saved many of our lives. I think it's a really important idea, and I'm so glad it's serving as the theme for today. Let's hear from Jamie Anderson.
First, I just want to say how wonderful it is to hear Bobbi and Barb again. I haven't heard either of you play live in so long, and it just touches me. So, so just a short thing about my personal story. I was a Girl Scout from the time I was 7 till I was a senior in Girl Scouts. A senior in high school, and in my senior troop I met my first girlfriend, and she took me to my first lesbian bar at age 17, and I used her ID to get in, which is funny because she's 6 inches shorter than I am, but the driver's license had been through the wash a few times, and I guess I distracted the door person by kissing her, and so that's I'm a slut. So anyway, so that was how I discovered lesbians. And then it was a year or two later that I went to my first women's music concert, and it was Theresa Dell, and I was smitten. She sang an Alex Dawkins song. She sang her own compositions, and I said, this is it for me. And I discovered so many artists after that, including Chris Williamson, that's who wrote that beautiful song that Bobbi did. So if I could, I'd like to talk a little bit about women's music in general. I wrote a book. It's called An Army of Lovers, and it's about women's music of the 70s and 80s, which was the heyday of women's music. And rather than me trying to stumble through stuff that I'm pulling from memory, I thought I'd read from part of my book and give you all a little more of a fleshed out picture of women's music. Kay said a lot, which was great. So maybe this will give you some more information about women's music. Musician Meg Christian invented the term women's music, says one of our most notable performers, Chris Williamson. When I asked what it meant then, she replied, I had no idea. Nobody knew. In my interviews with women involved in this great phenomenon, I heard over and over again that no one knew what they were doing, so it's not surprising that defining it was hard. Olivia Records president Judy DeLucach did a pretty good job, though. In the 80s, she was interviewed by Bitch, which was a women's rock magazine, and what she told them was, women's music simply reflects the consciousness of the audience. It doesn't have anything to do with the musical style. Lesbian cultural worker Sue Goldwoman defined women's music this way. To a certain extent, the women's music movement was a lesbian music movement. There were a few straight women who were involved. Kristen Lems, who was the founder of the National Women's Music Festival, is a straight woman. But for the most part, they were lesbian women, and they were writing music about lesbians, about each other, about their relationships, and singing it for other women who were mostly, but not exclusively, lesbians. And that was something that had never been reflected anywhere in the world at any other time. Women's music impacted the lives of lesbians and feminists in a profound way not found anywhere else, touching on issues important to us. It could be a love song to a woman. It could be a song about women's rights. It could be an instrumental piece composed and played by women. It was a good way for us to feel positive about ourselves in a time when it was hard to be a lesbian and a feminist. Musician activist Nancy Vogel says, music was the vehicle for us to experience a generation of women coming of age and creating a new vision of what it meant to be a woman. We were defining ourselves as opposed to being defined by a dominant culture, i.e. patriarchy. This amazing network of women performers, technicians, concert producers, venues, and media began in the 70s with performers like folk singer Maxine Feldman, R&B performer Linda Tillery, singer-songwriter Chris Williamson, bluegrass Americana multi-instrumentalist Robin Flower, jazz classical composer Mary Watkins, and activist singer Holly Near. And later they were joined by many, many others, including bilingual singer-songwriter Lucy Blue Tremblay, classical duo Musica Femina, rock band Two Nice Girls, singer-songwriter Deirdre McKella, comedy band The Fabulous Dyke Tones, and folk band Esquiada. Women's festivals that featured only women's performers sprung up all over, and the biggest was the Michigan Women's Music Festival, which grew to almost 10,000 in attendance. I was there that year. It was just astounding. Women everywhere. Women trained each other to DJ radio shows, run sound, and distribute albums. We had our own periodicals. We had our own production companies. At the start of the 80s, distributor Lady Slipper offered 500 titles. The 1987 resource directory Women's Music Plus listed over 100 venues and producers, 14 women's music festivals, and more than 200 performers. Tony Armstrong Jr., musician and publisher of Hotwire, our women's music magazine, recalls, "We've all been touched permanently. These experiences have, over the years, changed the views and expectations of hundreds of thousands of women." So that gives you an idea of the scope of women's music and all the things that we touched on. So we've also touched on, our age and how things have changed. And so I thought I'd do an original song that talks about that. Let's see if I can situate myself so that you can see me and hear me. This is called Black and White. was sure years ago I knew everything there was to know. Thought I knew dark from light, how to stand my ground, when to fight. But then I learned to let it be. The more gray I get, the less black and white I see. I tell you how it came to this. Every day was a simple kiss. I fell into the arms of hope, never knowing how it'd go. And then I learned to let it be. The more gray I get, the less black and white I see. Indigo or blackest night, palest pink or brightest white, it all depends on the light, on the light. And I learned to let it be. The more gray I get, the less black and white I see. The less black and white I see. So that's black and white. Thank you. And there's just one other thing I want to say, that in your intro, Kay, you got it all right, except I was not raised in Canada. I was raised in the U.S. I lived here for 40 years. And then, oh no, it was Amy who said that. And then I live in Canada now, but I'm in Arizona at this moment because winter.
Ah, that's why.
Yeah, but I'm originally from Arizona.
I thought you had moved to Ottawa.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I think their bio said hailed from, so I apologize
Oh, that's
for
all right.
misinterpreting that.
That was a great song, Jamie.
Nice changes. in that.
Excellent.
Yeah, nice changes.
Thank you.
Making my gray hair happy. Very happy. Yeah, and that was thank you for providing even more specific information on the history of women's music, especially the time period that we're talking about this morning. That was really great. I wanted to, it made me think that I wanted to raise the name of Alex Dopkin because she was such an important force in defining women's music and in defining lesbian music. I mean, she comes before Chris Williamson and before Meg Christian, and she passed away this year, as I'm sure all of you know. Yes. So so we want to give a hail and hearty up to Alex. Okay, but hey, let's go over to the woman who's on the business side, Deb D'alessandro, who's been, so she's got her finger on the pulse because she's been running this radio show, the Amazon Music Program, for over 20 years now. So over 25 years, is it? Something like that. Yeah.
A long time.
So take it away, Deb. Deb's got great stories, I'm sure, on every one of you and not me. I don't.
Look out.
Should I be worried?
Please, yes.
Deb. Don't call her Debbie. Whatever you do not call her Debbie.
Yeah, if you knew me before 1982, you're allowed to call me.
Right.
I'm delighted to be part of this and really grateful to the Susquehanna folk group for putting this together, and that you're recording it, because I agree with you, Kay. We need to preserve our history, because so much of it is oral history and stories told. I resonated with so many of the stories that each of you shared. The place that I came aware of women's music really intersects with my awareness of being a lesbian. So I grew up in a suburb of Pittsburgh, and I've always known that all the good stuff on the radio dial is usually to the left. So there were a couple of college stations on the left side of the dial.
Right.
And Carnegie Mellon University, which was WCMU, had a great station with lots of alternative kind of music. And they had two women's music shows. One was called a feminist music program called Women Hold Up Half the Sky. And the other was a lesbian music program called Woman to Woman. And this was around 1977 when I was in junior high. And they both aired like late at night. And I heard for the first time the music of Holly Near and Meg Christian and Farron and Marky Adam. And these were women singing love songs to other women and singing about their own empowerment. And it absolutely blew me away, because it made me realize that the feelings that I had been having of crushes on other girls, since upper elementary school, I wasn't alone. It was so incredibly powerful. And I had a brief, very secretive love affair when I was 16 with a 17-year-old girl whose parents were very devout Jehovah's Witnesses. So we had to be very clandestine. But I and her, she had an unusual name. Her first name is Waverly. I did a dedication to her of Marky Adams' Having Been Touched Tender Lady on the radio from Deb to Wave. And I can remember the DJ saying, "Oh, here's a really romantic one." And I don't know, I never found, we'd already kind of broken up. I never found out if she actually heard it, but just the fact that I declared that on the airwaves was incredibly powerful for me. So I really feel fortunate that the music and my feeling affirmed as a lesbian came together at the same time. That biggest Mitch Fest, Michigan Women's Music Festival that Jamie mentioned, my space heater just kicked on. So Kay, you'll tell me if I need to cut that off. You guys don't hear it? Everything's good? It was 1985. I was a sophomore in college. Three of us drove from Philadelphia. I went to college in Philly and stayed. Drove from Philadelphia to Hart, Michigan. It was 16 hours. There were only two of us who were drivers in the car, and it was the first and only time I've driven a stick shift. So it was a very exciting road trip. And 85 was the 10th anniversary of the Mitch Fest, and there were almost 10,000 women there. And I was still kind of struggling whether my identity was bisexual or lesbian. And I felt quite affirmed at that event. And I like to think that it may be the only place on the planet that there was a support group every morning for straight and bisexual identified women, because they were in the minority. And I went to one of those support groups and said, "This isn't me." It was, and I was too shy to talk to most women. I didn't, the experience was completely internal of standing in this diverse sea of women of all kinds, all shapes, all sizes, all races, all ages, affirming their love for other women. So that was incredibly powerful for me. Other thing I wanted to share, and Barb, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but Barb knows that we both worked for the Nature Conservancy at the same time. She was at the Middletown office and I was at the Philadelphia admin office doing fundraising. And one of the science staff said at a staff meeting, "Hey, one of our people," we were talking about an event that we were going to have a fundraiser and we couldn't really afford musicians. He said, "Well, there's a gal at Middletown office who's a musician. She's got this album. I have it." And he held up "No Shirt Required." So this was my second job out of college. So it's somewhere in the late 80s. And I was like, "Oh my God, there's a lesbian who works at the Middletown office." So email was new. I reached out to Barb. And the next time she was in Philly, I said, "Well, definitely, be in touch with me." And she came to a meeting of an organization that's now defunct, but it actually grew out of national. It was called AWMAC, the Association of Women's Music and Culture. And we were there was a burgeoning Philadelphia chapter, and Barb was coming to that meeting, and she didn't know where the meeting was held. And I'm like, "Oh, it's at the Lesbian Gay Community Center. I know where it is. I'll take you to breakfast and we'll go." So the other interesting intertwining of my life with Barb's is that at that meeting in 1993, I met my now partner of 28 years, Carol Brown. So Barb has been pivotal in a couple of different threads in my life. The other thing I wanted to mention is the fact that women's music continues. It's so much of the world has changed, right? In our next workshop, we're going to talk about, the venues that you all came up in, and you all started making music pre-internet, which, makes me sometimes feel like a little dicosaurus, although among you all, I do feel young because I'm 57. But the fact that social media and the internet has been a platform that I think it's a double-edged sword. I think a lot of older lesbians who are still a part of putting together music festivals, because I'm part of Sister Space, lament that, like, how do we get younger women involved? Because we all came to those events out of isolation, because the only way to connect with other women was at events, coffee houses, political organizing, music festivals. And now, social media gives us these wonderful opportunities to connect. I sometimes think it gives the illusion of connection sometimes, right? Because for me, the best of social media is when it leads to actual real life connection. But it also means that young lesbian, bi, gay, queer, however one defines, if you are outside of the heteronormative, don't have to experience the isolation we did because of those social media platforms. So it's a journey that continues. I have done Amazon Country since 96. It was founded in 1974. And I like to remind people I was 10 then. So I did not found that show. I stand on the shoulders of giants. Roberta Louise Hacker, Victoria Brownworth, and a woman named Rose, who his last name is escaping me because it's not somebody I know personally, but those were the three women who founded Amazon Country, which I gave the tagline, Music from Lesbian and Feminist Perspectives. Continues on the air on WXPN. Used to be an hour. I used to do it live at 9 o'clock on Sundays. Things changed. I'm now a half an hour, Sunday nights at 11 p.m. I know that's late for some of you, but xpn.org. You can go to programs and go to Amazon Country. We do have archived interviews. You can live stream it anywhere, 11 p.m. Eastern on Sunday nights. But I have interviews with Holly Near and Tret Fury and Janice Ian and authors like Matthew Shepard's mother. A lot of great interviews that are archived there. So that's my long ramble, and I'll turn it back to you, Kay.
Great. Thank you, Deb. Thanks for that. I was going to say a little bit about myself, but I think I'm going to be a good moderator and put myself out to pasture so that we can get to a few questions and open up our discussion a little bit. We do have a question that was in the chat that I would like to open up just for a minute. What role did the many women's choirs, often lesbian feminist focused in cities across the country, play in the women's music movement? Great question. Again, I think there were so many avenues that one could sort of begin to take in this very, very fruitful period beginning in the 70s and into the 80s. As Deb said, it was a process of us beginning to find each other and to create these sort of subversive institutions, I would say. But yeah.
Can I jump in with that? Because one of the things I forgot to say, in 1992, so 1992, I joined the Anacrusis Women's Choir in Philadelphia because I tried softball and I wasn't any good at it. And when I asked people, how do I meet women? They were like, well, there's softball, there's choirs. So it was personally very good. I sang with them for 7 seasons. They continue to this day. Interestingly, they've taken the word women out of their title. They're the Anacrusis Feminist Choir because they're being affirming of folks who are gender nonconforming. But I also went to a number of GALA, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance of Choruses.
Right.
Had big conferences. You've never experienced being on a log flume ride until you've been on it. It was in Orlando, or Tampa rather, and they rented the whole water park for us one evening. And I was on that with guys from a gay men's chorus somewhere who sang the Gilligan's Island theme in 5-part harmony as we did the long flute. It is a highlight of my life. But many, many women have both as audience members and singers found deep connection to the women's community through choirs.
Excellent.
And there's still a very active one in Harrisburg, right, Bobbi?
There is Central Pennsylvania Women's Chorus, and they've been kicking around since the 80s, I think. They were one of the first. They were, and I think what happens is, and you guys can also jump in, we get into the safety in numbers idea, where because it is not a single person standing up and it is more of a group, I think it becomes a more diverse. With Wind and Wood, when I played with them, we had, like I said, there was an out lesbian and a married straight woman, and then me, who was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. So everybody gets to find a place at the table, right? So I think what happens with these women's groups, these women's music and women's choral groups, is, we can all talk about great choruses that we've had a chance to sing with, when we've traveled, and to have them singing with us on our sets. And what I found is that, look at Sue Fink. Sue Fink was a fabulous, and Jamie probably writes about her in the book, totally ahead of her time, 70s and 80s entertainer who is now leading up the Angel City Choir in LA, which I think everybody is starting to see part of them doing the America's Got Talent or something. So what you have are these diverse groups of people that they're not all lesbians, they're not all straight women, they're just women, or they're feminists, in that, like what Deb was saying. And I think that really helps. I think that helps a community support and show up and support these musicians and these singers. And, we can talk about that later, but I think that helps the people who are showing up to support as well not feel so associated with, like, the guilt by association issue that happens a lot around here. Like, oh my God, you went to hear so-and-so, you must be this. Well, if you went to hear this group, there's a couple of, it makes people feel a little better when there's a diverse group of people in it for some reason.
Interesting. That's an interesting point of view. It's making me think too that although we associate American Protestantism with capitalism, and as we must, I think American Protestantism also gave rise to a lot of lesbian singers and choirs, the model for choirs. I'm just wondering how many of you were choir trained in some aspect of your youth. I certainly was in the Presbyterian Church in Michigan. And, I've always been interested in this connection because that was the place where I learned the joy of singing with other women, singing and having a place to do it at a time I was a very precocious lesbian. I was probably interested in girls from the time I was like 3. So, I didn't have a whole lot of outlets, but I started choir when I was in the cherub choir when I was like 4. And, that was a real,
The cherub choir?
Yeah. The cherub choir.
I love it.
The little.
Ours was the chorister choir for the
chorister choir. There you go.
Barb, it looked like you raised your hand, Barb.
I would just wanted to give a shout out to Sistrum. Lansing's women's choir has been around since 1986.
Yep.
And I happened to record my first CD release concert back in 1991, I think it was, 91 or 92. And it's so fun to look back and see. It was a smaller choir back then, or chorus back then, but they're still going strong. And as you were saying, Bobbi, about coming together and seeing Sistrum was always such a wonderful thing. They would sing absolutely hilarious songs. We could all laugh together. They would sing really powerful songs like By Sweet Honey and the Rock. They would sing songs that were love stories. And we all would come together and just bathe in the music, and in the sisterhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they have a lot of fans, I think, that are not lesbian as well.
Right.
They
Right.
just do incredibly beautiful music, and I just want to give a shout out to them because they're
Excellent.
great
Excellent.
group of
You know,
women.
I think what was
Amy.
interesting- Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I just want to say
wanted to
real,
see
a
if you
real
had
quick.
anything else in the chat.
Yeah.
Are there other questions?
But you know what? There's a comment in the chat that I think might be worth noting, which is somebody asking for, a recording of this, not realizing, I think the thing that's interesting, not realizing that women's music was lesbian music. And so I wondered if you could address that, because you're all lesbians, but I think you've also noted that, is women's music feminist music? So maybe talk about that for a minute.
Well, like I said in my description, women's music is defined by its audience. And its audience was mostly lesbian, mostly feminist, but we did have fans who fell into other categories.
I think we still do. I mean, I don't, I think I think the one thing I wanted to say quick just to touch on the women's chorus real quick is Central PA Women's Chorus they made a big statement when they spelled women with a Y,
Oh, yeah.
and that was when I have traveled across country and I have seen that in bigger cities and bigger areas where you can get away with it, but to have that in Central PA when they went and made the big decision to do it with a Y, it's like that's a political statement right there, and again, it's not just lesbians, it's a feminist standpoint, like Jamie was saying, and therefore then the audience that shows up knows what they're kind of supporting.
Right. It's a code. It became a very important code.
Yeah.
Yeah, back to the women's music question. To me, I would say that women's music, it's a thread that goes from the heart or the voice of the person who's performing and connects with another, usually woman, in their heart. And it can be about a lot of different topics, but it's a common unspoken language, I guess, that we share with one another. And you know it when you feel it. You know it when you feel it in your heart. And that's how it is for me anyway.
Yeah, and we called it women's music back in the day because that was a lot safer than saying lesbian music or feminist music. Back then feminist was a dirty word, and you certainly didn't want to say you were a lesbian. Holy cow.
Oh, sure.
Right.
So I hate to interrupt this amazing conversation, but it is 11 o'clock. We knew we could have spent an hour and a half on this topic, but we do have a lot more coming up. So I just want to remind everybody that there are 4 more sessions today that we'll be looking at venues, looking at the culture, looking at the space that's created to support women's music. And then there's a really great songwriting session coming up. These women are all songwriters, and how do they do that, and how do they kind of drive their messages home? There's a session on technique, open tuning, and rhythm, and things like that. And then there's a round robin at the end. So the next session will start at 11:15. Our moderator will be Deb D'alessandro, and it's venues, views, and pews, creating community through music. So, and I just want to remind you all that each session has its own access link. So you'll need to return to the email from your ticket confirmation email in order to access the link for the next session. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Kay, for your great moderating and great stories. And we have more stories coming up. So stick around and we'll see you back here at 11:15.
Thanks, Kay.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Thanks, Deb.
A great beginning.
Thank you.
Great beginning to the day.